You're just a burnt-out Mountie, and that electrician you married doesn't have a single thing worth respecting." My mother's voice came out slow and flat, the way it always did when she wanted each word to land like a stone. She was standing at the granite island in her Oakville kitchen, still wearing her silk robe at 11 in the morning, a champagne flute already half empty beside the coffee maker. She didn't raise her voice. She never needed to. She reached across the counter, lifted the ivory envelope, my invitation, and dropped it into the recycling bin beside the refrigerator. She didn't look at me when she did it. That was the part that found the marrow. Not the words, not the gesture, the not looking. "Your sister is marrying one of the most important men on Bay Street. I have spent 2 years making sure this family looks the part." She pressed the tips of her fingers against the counter and held them there, white at the knuckles. "And you are going to walk in there with a government pension and a husband whose hands smell like wire strippers and make us all look like we crawled out of a construction trailer. Stay home. It's the kindest thing you can do for your sister." I was standing in that kitchen in my civilian clothes, my RCMP service having ended 18 months earlier, and I could feel the shape of every word my mother had just said pressing against the inside of my chest. I had stood in active weather in Manitoba at -40. I had knelt in the dark beside a highway in northern Ontario, with my bare palm on a man's throat and counted his pulse for 3 hours while the rain came down and the tree line was still burning. But my own mother had a way of finding angles that no training ever prepared me for. I picked up my jacket from the back of the kitchen chair. My husband Joel's hand found mine before I even reached the door. I hadn't heard him come in from the porch. His hand was dry and warm and calloused from 20 years of pulling wire through tight spaces, and when his fingers closed around mine, I stopped moving. Just for a second. Just long enough to remember what solid ground felt like. We walked out together without another word. The door closed behind us with a sound that was smaller than the moment deserved. Joel drove. He always drove when I needed to be still. His truck was a 2009 F-150 with a crack running across the lower left corner of the windshield that neither of us had gotten around to fixing. The heat came on slowly. The seat smelled like coffee and electrical tape. I watched his profile against the gray November light the whole way home. The flat line of his jaw, the small scar above his left eyebrow where a conduit fitting had caught him 6 years back. He never talked about it. He never talked about most things. What Joel communicated, he communicated through his hands. The way they steadied a wire connection, the way they held a door for strangers, the way they had held both of mine at our wedding, in front of 23 people in a community hall in Guelph, while my mother sat in the front row and cried into a handkerchief that had nothing to do with happiness. I knew those hands. I knew what they had done. 3 years ago, in January, Joel was on a service call in a 3-story walk-up in Hamilton when the gas line in the basement caught. He heard the smoke alarm from the 3rd floor. By the time he reached the stairwell, the 2nd floor landing was already fully involved. The fire department was 4 minutes out. A woman and her 2 children were trapped on the 3rd floor with no external escape. Joel went back up. He got all 3 of them to the fire escape. The youngest child, a boy not yet 2 years old, had to be carried. Joel carried him with one arm and kept the mother moving with the other. His right forearm was burned from the elbow to the wrist when a burning door frame came down. He told the paramedics he was fine. He drove himself to the hospital at midnight. He never filed a complaint with the building's owner, never spoke to a journalist, never mentioned it to anyone except me, and only because I found the discharge papers folded in his glove compartment 3 weeks later. He didn't think he'd done anything worth discussing. That was Joel. The truck rattled over the railway crossing at the end of our street. I pressed my thumb against the wooden ring I wore on my right hand. A thin band turned from a piece of black cherry wood that Joel had made me the night before our wedding. He'd sanded it by hand, 400 grit, then rubbed it with linseed oil until it glowed. I'd worn it through everything since. It had been on my hand in the rain on that highway in northern Ontario. It had been on my hand in the briefing room when the federal liaison told me the operation was classified, that no record would exist, that this conversation had not happened. It had been on my hand every morning since when I woke up and decided, again, not to tell anyone. What my mother did not know, what nobody in that family knew, was what had happened 7 years earlier on a logging road off Highway 11, 200 kilometers north of Orillia, in the dark. It was late September. I was a sergeant with the RCMP's Federal Protection Unit, working a classified transport assignment. A senior official, Raymond Foote, retired Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, brought back into federal service as a special envoy to an international tribunal, was being moved between locations. The convoy was small, 2 armored vehicles, 6 officers. The road we were on wasn't supposed to be on any official route, that was the point. The ambush came at 9:47 in the evening. A logging truck had been abandoned across the road at a blind curve. Our lead vehicle went into the ditch. Gunfire from the tree line began within 4 seconds of us stopping. In the chaos, our communications went down, a jammer, we later confirmed. The 2 officers in the lead vehicle were both injured. The Justice was in the second vehicle with me. We were taking fire from 3 positions, and I had 3 officers still on their feet. The protocol was clear: secure the principal, hold position, wait for backup. I held position for 90 seconds. Long enough to run the arithmetic. Backup was 22 minutes out at minimum. The tree line was tightening. We had 1 armored door between us and 3 active shooters, and it was not going to be enough for 22 minutes. I made the call. I got the Justice out of the vehicle on the passenger side, low and moving fast, and I moved him 60 meters through standing water into a ravine that ran parallel to the road. I covered him with my body in the dark. A round caught my left shoulder going in. Not deep, more of a graze, but it bled badly. I pressed my palm against it and kept moving. We stayed in that ravine for 2 hours and 40 minutes while my remaining officers held the road. When backup arrived, the Justice was alive. I was not, by any clinical definition, badly hurt. By any other definition, I was not intact. 2 days later, in an Ottawa briefing room, I was told the operation had been classified at the highest level. The Justice's involvement in the tribunal was sensitive. The ambush could not be publicly acknowledged. I would receive no commendation on record. There would be no file with my name on it. They offered a financial settlement. I declined. I asked only that the names of my injured officers be protected from any accountability proceedings. They agreed. I signed the papers. I told no one, not even Joel, what had actually happened that night. He knew I'd been injured on duty. He knew I'd left the force 18 months after, when the damage in my shoulder had accumulated enough that the job stopped being something I could do safely. He never pushed me to say more than that. That was also Joel. My mother spent the 7 years following that night calling me a washed-up public servant with no ambition and no future. On the morning of my sister's wedding, while 600 guests in cashmere and Bay Street money were beginning to arrive at a private estate on Lake Rosseau in Muskoka, I dressed in civilian clothes and drove to the RCMP National Cenotaph in Ottawa. I had been planning it for weeks, not as a gesture, not because anyone would see me. I needed to be somewhere that told the truth about what things cost. I walked the path alone. The names on the stone were cut deep, dozens of them, officers who had gone out and not come back. I stopped in front of one I returned to every year, Corporal Denny Fauché, killed at 31, 3 postings, and a daughter he had met twice. I crouched down and pressed 2 fingers against the carved letters of his name. Cold granite. That is what sacrifice feels like when you touch it. Not warm, not soft, not wrapped in ceremony. Cold and permanent and heavier than anything you can explain to someone who hasn't needed to understand it. Corporal Sheena Trites had been 3 vehicles ahead of me on Highway 11 that night. She had survived the ambush. She had not survived the complications. 4 spinal surgeries, a wheelchair in Chilliwack now, a phone call every December to tell me she didn't blame anyone. I believed her every time. I carried it anyway. Your posture says you're still carrying a post on your back, Sergeant. I didn't need to turn around. Gilles Poulin, retired RCMP superintendent, 63 years old, had come to this cenotaph every Thursday for the past 9 years, in Ottawa snow and August heat and the kind of freezing rain that makes the capital miserable. He never missed. I stood and turned. He looked the same as always, gray at the temples, face like a topographic map of somewhere serious, his hand wrapped around a thermos of black coffee that was always too hot to drink. I told him I'd been ambushed by my own family. The words came out flat, like a field report. He listened without expression. Then he held out the thermos. Drink this. It'll burn your tongue. That's the point. He waited while I drank. You know what your family can't take from you? He pointed at my chest, not gently. The thing you did when nobody was watching, the thing you chose when the protocol said hold, that's yours. It was always yours. They don't know what they're talking about because they don't know what you've done, and that is not a disadvantage. That is your armor. He put his hands on my shoulder, my left one, the one that still ached in cold weather, and held it there a moment. Go home, Sergeant. Whatever comes next, go home first. My phone buzzed on the walk back to my car, a photo from Joel. On our porch step sat a white insulated catering box. He'd sent a picture of the note taped to the lid, written in my mother's dramatic cursive. Leftovers from the Rosseau Lodge caterer, foie gras and champagne truffles. I thought your handyman husband might like to know what real food tastes like. Keep out of the way today. Mother. I read it twice. I put my phone in my pocket. I drove home. Joel had already moved the box to the edge of the porch. He was sitting on the front steps in his work jacket when I pulled up. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me the way he always does, steady, without editorial, and got up to open my door. The box went into the trash. The lid came down. We went inside. Joel made tea without asking. I sat at the kitchen table and listened to the kettle, the radiator, the street outside, and I thought about the ring on my finger and the ravine and Sheena's voice every December saying she didn't blame anyone. I thought about my mother's hand dropping that envelope into the recycling bin without looking at me. I thought about my sister sitting across the kitchen throughout the whole thing, filing her nails, saying nothing, letting it happen because it cost her nothing to let it happen. The tea was ready. Joel set a mug in front of me. 3 vehicles turned onto our street. The sound was wrong for the neighborhood. Not a neighbor's pickup, not a delivery truck. The specific, low frequency of heavy federal vehicles with something under the hood that civilian engines don't carry. Joel reached the front window first. He turned back to me and his face was very still. RCMP plates, 3 of them, parked directly front of the house. They're not getting out yet. I stood up and walked to the door. 5 officers in dress reds, the formal Red Serge of the RCMP, that only comes out for ceremonies, for funerals, for moments that require the full weight of what the force has always represented. And in front of them, a woman in a gray civilian suit with a federal identification lanyard that I recognized immediately. The liaison from the Ottawa briefing room, 7 years ago, the one who had handed me the classification papers. She stopped at the bottom of our porch steps. Her voice was clear and precise. Sergeant Audra Sinclair, a federal request has been made for your attendance at an event currently in progress. The request originates from Justice Raymond Foote. 1 beat of silence. He used the phrase logging road 11. Those 3 words had been classified for 7 years. The internal designation for the operation. No one said them outside a sealed room. The air in my chest went still. I looked at the liaison for a long moment. "Give me 8 minutes," I said. I went to the bedroom closet, pushed past Joel's work bags and my old patrol kit until my hand found the dry cleaning bag at the back. I hadn't opened it in 18 months. The Red Serge. My formal dress uniform, the scarlet tunic that every RCMP officer earns and most wear only twice in a career. I put it on piece by piece with the precision of a pre-mission equipment check. The yellow striped riding breeches first, then the tunic, each brass button catching the bedroom light. The lanyard, the badge, the shoulder numerals, the service medals on the left breast, each one a place, a price, a specific decision made under specific conditions that no one at that wedding could begin to comprehend. The Stetson last, set level, 2 fingers above the brow, cutting my face between light and shadow. Brown leather riding boots, struck against the floor to seat them. I stood in front of the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me was not the one who had stood in her mother's kitchen that morning, with a recycling bin full of her own invitation. This one had a jaw that didn't move, and eyes that held information. This uniform had been in a ravine in the rain. It had been folded in a bag in a closet for 18 months. It was still, somehow, the most honest thing about me. Joel was in the doorway when I turned around. He was leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, watching me, the same way he had looked at me across a room at a mutual friend's birthday party 11 years ago, and not looked away until I looked back. No complicated expression, just sure. He nodded once, that was all. I walked out the front door in my Red Serge, and the 5 officers in dress reds straightened without being told to. The federal liaison opened the rear door of the center vehicle. I got in. The convoy moved north through the city, and then out onto the 400 heading toward Muskoka. The officers drove without speaking. Through the tinted window, the highway opened into shield country, granite outcroppings and stands of pine, the landscape that tells you Ontario is getting serious. The lakes began appearing, gray-blue and flat under the November sky. I sat with my hands on my knees and said nothing and watched the shield pass. An hour and 10 minutes later, the convoy turned onto the private road leading down to the Rosseau estate. Stone gates, private security in dark blazers with earpieces. The lead vehicle's window went down, a federal shield went up, and the gate opened before the first vehicle touched the brakes. We drove through without slowing. Tires on groomed gravel, past old-growth maple, past a marble fountain still running in the cold. The convoy stopped on the stone forecourt in front of the main lodge. The door opened. I stepped out. The Red Serge in November afternoon light does something to a crowd. The color is not red the way a fire truck is red. It is something older, something that carries weight accumulated over generations. And when 600 people at a Muskoka lakeside wedding turn to look at it, arriving unannounced with a federal escort, the sound that comes from them is not quite shock. It is the sound of a room recalibrating everything it thought it understood about the afternoon. I clasped my hands behind my back and walked through the center of the forecourt at a measured pace. The RCMP officers fanned out on either side. Whispers moved through the crowd like a current. I swept my gaze across the stone terrace and found my mother first because she found me, The color leaving her face in real time, the champagne flute she was holding, tilting, then not, the sound of crystal breaking on the flagstone. She was gripping the arm of the woman beside her, and her mouth was open. My sister was at the head table. She had gone the color of old wax, the diamond tiara listed to the left. Her new husband Preston had risen halfway to his feet and stopped, one hand braced on the table, his face performing the specific arithmetic of a man who understands that something he does not understand has just walked through his door. The crowd parted. Not because anyone directed them to. Raymond Foote was 71 years old. He walked with a cane now, mahogany, brass handle, and his hair was white, but his back was straight and his eyes had not changed at all. I had spent 2 hours and 40 minutes lying in a ravine beside this man, counting his pulse by feel in the dark. His resting pulse had been 48 per minute, which told me he was either medically unusual or the calmest person I had ever encountered in a crisis, both, as it turned out. He walked straight to me and stopped. I came to attention and saluted, full extension held. He did not salute back. He put both of his hands around mine and squeezed with a grip that still carried the strength of a man who had survived something. His eyes were directly on mine. His voice carried. He had spent decades in courtrooms, and he knew exactly how much air a voice needed to fill. 7 years ago, he said, on a logging road north of Aurelia, this officer disobeyed a direct protocol to hold position. She extracted me from a vehicle under active fire and moved me through terrain I would not have survived alone. She covered me with her own body. She kept me alive for 2 hours and 40 minutes until extraction arrived. He paused. Let it reach the edges of the crowd. She declined every form of recognition. She asked only that the file be sealed and that she never be thanked publicly. Another pause. I have honored that request for 7 years. I am honoring it no longer. He looked at me. Canada owes this woman a debt that cannot be settled in any currency I am aware of. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Then 600 people rose from their seats at the same moment. I did not cry, I did not smile. I stood in my Red Serge with my hands at my sides, and I let the sound move over the terrace like a wave, and I watched it hit my mother and my sister, and I did not look away. Justice Foote turned to face the room, and his voice dropped several degrees. I was informed this afternoon that the officer who saved my life was told by her own family she was not welcome at this event, that she received a note with catered leftovers suggesting she stay in her place. He did not raise his voice. I wanted her here today because this is where she has always belonged. She belongs everywhere she chooses to walk into. The federal liaison moved toward my mother and my sister and Preston without being asked. They filed through the French doors of the lodge into a private room. I followed. Preston sank into an armchair. He was a tall man, and at that moment the chair was the only thing holding him upright. He looked at my sister the way people look at someone they no longer fully recognize. My mother stood in the center of the room, with her arms crossed over her chest, in a way that looked like composure, and was actually the opposite. The version of herself she had worn since 11 o'clock that morning, the silk robe, the half-finished champagne, the recycling bin, was gone. What replaced it was something I had last seen when I was young, the specific fear of a woman who has built everything on a story and has just watched someone read the original draft out loud in front of witnesses. Justice Foote set the end of his cane on the floor and looked at my mother with the patience of a man who had presided over enough proceedings to know exactly when someone had no room left. I understand you have presented this family as something it is not, he said quietly. I understand that the debt structure behind this wedding is not what you told your son-in-law's advisors it was. He did not raise his voice once. I am not here to adjudicate that. That is between your family and the lawyers who are going to be very occupied in the coming weeks. I am here because I owed someone in this room the chance to walk through a door she was told not to walk through. He left. My sister moved first. She crossed to me in 3 steps and grabbed my arm with both hands, and what came out of her was not a speech. It was fragments, that she hadn't known the details, that she thought I'd been injured but not how badly, that she had told Preston for years she had been financially supporting me because it made her sound generous. And now she understood, with the specific clarity that only catastrophic public humiliation delivers, that she had constructed a version of herself out of someone else's service and sacrifice and silence. She was crying, real tears with difficulty breathing. I looked at her for a long moment. I removed her hands from my arm, one at a time, and straightened my sleeve. My mother reached for my hand. I stepped back. I forgive you both, I said, as blood, as family. I let that sit for a breath. But the trust is gone, the loyalty is gone. It died in your kitchen this morning when you put my invitation in the recycling bin without looking at me. There's nothing left to rebuild on, and I won't pretend there is. I picked up my Stetson from where I'd set it on the table. You built something here. The fire that's taking it down tonight, you built that too. I won't be the one to call it out. I walked back through the lodge and across the forecourt in the November evening, the Red Serge catching the last light off Lake Rosseau. The convoy was waiting. I thanked the federal liaison and asked for a moment. She nodded and gave me one. I stood at the edge of the forecourt and looked out at the lake for 30 seconds. The water was dark and very still. Somewhere out on it, a loon called once and went quiet. Then I got in the car and went home. Joel was in the kitchen when I came through the door. He'd made soup, the kind he always made in November, with whatever root vegetables were in the crisper and a bay leaf, and enough black pepper to make the steam smell like something real. The pot was on the low burner. He had a dish towel over his shoulder and a smear of something orange on his wrist, and he looked up when I came in, and the corner of his mouth moved, one side, that small unhurried thing, and I crossed the kitchen and put my face against his chest, and his arms came around me. He smelled like soup, and the faint chemical trace of electrical work that never fully washes out, and beneath that, the specific human warmth of a person who has been waiting for you without making it into a performance. I closed my eyes. The fallout for the others arranged itself in the weeks that followed without any contribution from me. Preston's legal team reviewed the prenuptial agreement within 48 hours. My sister had signed it without reading page 19, where the clause regarding fraudulent misrepresentation of financial history sat waiting like a landmine for exactly this occasion. She walked away from the marriage with her personal belongings and a number considerably smaller than anything she had prepared herself for. She had entered that wedding in a costume built from stolen money, and now the costume was being returned along with everything it had purchased. My mother's social network dissolved at the speed that networks built entirely on borrowed reputation always do when the borrowing comes to light. The story Justice Foote had told on that terrace did not stay at the estate. It reached Bay Street by Sunday. By Tuesday, it had gone further. She texted me every few days for a month, variations on the same message, that she had been wrong, that she was sorry, that she was going to lose the house in Oakville, that she had no one left to call, that I was the only one who could make one phone call to the right person and change everything. I read the first 3 messages. I didn't open the rest. I went to her contact, pressed block, and set the phone face down on the counter. Cutting something out of yourself that shares your blood is the most difficult surgery a person can perform. But some wounds don't close until the source is removed, and I had been bleeding from this one since I was old enough to understand what was being taken from me and why. The decision wasn't made in anger. It was made with both hands steady, the way you do things that have to last. Joel handed me a cup of tea. The mug was one of 2 matching ones we'd bought at a farmer's market in Prince Edward County the summer we married. His had a chip on the handle. Mine had a hairline crack that had been there for years and had never gotten worse. We sat at the kitchen table in the early morning and watched the light come through the window above the sink. The street was quiet. The radiator clicked. Outside, a Canada goose somewhere was making its opinion known about something and then was not. The strongest thing I have ever done was not run through active fire. It was not lie in a ravine in the rain with my hand on an old man's throat for 2 hours and 40 minutes in the dark. Those things were hard in ways that training and duty and adrenaline can carry you through if you let them. The strongest thing I ever did was stop paying for a world that had decided, before I was old enough to argue, that I was worth less than the version it was trying to build without me, to stop bleeding into a container that was going to be empty again by morning no matter how much I gave. To walk away from a recycling bin in a kitchen in Oakville and understand, finally, that being exiled from a place that was never home is not exile at all. It is just leaving. Joel finished his tea. I finished mine. The morning came through the window, gray and flat and entirely ours, and that was more than enough.